And for more on the escalating sanctions and what they could mean for the global economy, I'm joined by Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. Great to see you. So the Treasury Secretary details economic D-Day on Monday, but stopped short of the secondary sanctions that Besant warns could blow up the global financial system. So what would those secondary sanctions look like?
Well, if he wants to blow up the global economy, then obviously those sanctions would be targeting China. But I find that very unlikely. It is very much thanks to China that oil prices are not above $200. And it's because the Chinese dramatically reduced their demand for oil, the demand for Persian Gulf oil, and as a result, managed to keep oil prices roughly below $100. And the Chinese didn't do this to help the United States or to hurt Iran. It did it so because it wanted to save the global economy from a major recession that would be devastating for all. So if the U.S. at this point then starts to challenging China, targeting its financial transactions with Iran, then I think it would essentially be asking for a big fight with China at a point that it absolutely cannot afford it. So I find it very unlikely, and as a result, these sanctions do not appear to amount to much in terms of changing the picture. Will they add pressure on Iran? Yes. Will that change the picture? Undoubtedly.
But how serious could the economic fallout be for those who have business ties with Iran, apart from China?
Well, for those countries that have little way of resisting the United States, it could be quite problematic, not because the trade necessarily is so massive, but because the margins of those countries are so limited, and that they are somewhat dependent on Iran at the same time. So some of the neighboring countries that are trading with Iran in non-dollar trade, Iraq, for instance, will probably be quite squeezed, and Iraq simply doesn't have any margins to be able to resist any additional such pressures. So the U.S. is really, again, taking measures that puts most of the cost of these measures on the regional states, most of which did not want to see this war in the first place.
And Iran said it is fully prepared to retaliate. So how do you expect Iran to retaliate? What measures do you think Iran would roll out?
It very much depends on how biting these sanctions or these measures end up being. If they're not particularly biting on the Iranians, then we may take some very limited steps. But if it actually ends up becoming quite problematic for the Iranians, then we have seen a very clear pattern in the past in which the Iranians will retaliate. Back in 2019, when they were faced with maximum pressure sanctions, eventually they started attacking tankers in the Persian Gulf and eventually also struck at Saudi oil fields in order to raise the cost of that policy for the United States. Now you have a leadership in Iran that is much more willing to take risks, far less restrained than it was a couple of years ago. And as a result, it seems quite clear that economic targets inside of the region itself, potentially all the way in the Red Sea, will likely be how the Iranians respond if these sanctions end up becoming very binding.
Yeah, as you said, compared to 2015, the new leaders are more than willing to take risks. So how do you view this conflict in the long run? What, if any, are the paths to really de-escalation?
Well, both sides simply need to go back to the MOU, hopefully without any side really trying to renegotiate it. It will need to be some clarifications because Article 5, in terms of how the strait is going to be managed, was not entirely clear. I suspect that if the issue over the strait is resolved, the conflict will immediately then shift towards Lebanon, because that's another area in which the two sides sign something and it's not being implemented. And in fact, what the U.S. did in terms of signing this other agreement between Lebanon and Israel does contradict the MOU. And as a result, I think that one will have to be solved as well before they really can get to the core of the issue, which is the nuclear issue and sanctions relief.
Well, thank you very much for your insight. That is the Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute.
Thank you so much.